When I suggested she help with groceries since we lived together, my girlfriend scoffed. Be a man. That's your job, not mine. I just nodded. A week later, she came home to a locked fridge and empty cabinets. Alright, so I gotta get this down somewhere because my buddies are sick of hearing about it, but they're also the ones telling me I need to post this story. It all blew up over a carton of eggs, or rather, the lack of them. My now ex-girlfriend, Valerie, and I had been living together for a little over a year in my apartment. The arrangement was, I thought, pretty straightforward. I own a small but successful construction company. I work long, hard hours, but I make good money. Valerie was a freelance graphic designer, which was a fancy way of saying she had a laptop, an overdue art school loan, and a deep-seated aversion to a 9-to-5 schedule. When she moved in, we had a talk. I told her I was happy to be the provider, to cover the rent, the utilities, the car payments. It's how I'm wired. A man takes care of his home. All I asked in return was that she manage the domestic side of things. Keep the place clean, make sure we had food to eat, be a partner. She agreed. She said she loved the idea of a modern traditionalist relationship. The problem is, Valerie's version of modern traditionalist was a one-way street. She was all about being a modern, empowered woman who didn't need to be tied down by a man. Except when it came to his wallet. Her favorite topic was the patriarchy, and how it forced women into domestic servitude, usually brought up while she was sitting on the couch scrolling through Instagram while I was cooking dinner after a 10-hour day. She used feminism as a shield to avoid any and all responsibility while simultaneously expecting me to fulfill the most traditional provider role imaginable. The hypocrisy was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I put up with it for longer than I should have. Why? Because when we first met, she wasn't like that. She was driven, funny, and seemed to have her own life. The entitled, lazy person she had become was a slow, creeping change, like a foundation settling in a bad way. I kept thinking the old Valerie was still in there somewhere. I was wrong. The breaking point came on a Wednesday. I got home from a job site, covered in dust and completely exhausted, looking forward to a hot meal. I opened the fridge. It was a wasteland. A half-empty bottle of ketchup, a single, sad-looking lime, and a carton of almond milk with about a teaspoon of liquid left in it. The cabinets were the same story. A bag of stale chips and a few cans of beans. Valerie was in the living room, working on what she called a passion project, which looked a lot like online shopping. Hey, I said, trying to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. There's no food in the house. She didn't even look up from her laptop. Yeah, I was gonna go shopping, but I got into a really creative flow state. You know how it is. No, I don't, I said, the patience I had been clinging to for months finally starting to fray. I know that I transferred the grocery money to your account on Monday, like I do every week. It's Wednesday, and there's nothing to eat in this house. I've worked 60 hours this week, Val. The one thing I ask of you is that I can come home to a meal. She finally looked at me, her eyes full of a familiar, patronizing disdain. Wow, she scoffed. I'm not your 1950s housewife, I have my own life, my own ambitions. I'm not just here to cook and clean for you. No one is asking you to be a housewife, I said, my voice rising despite myself. I'm asking you to hold up your end of the very simple bargain we made. I pay for everything. You make sure the house runs. It's a team effort, or it's supposed to be. And then she said it. The line that brought the whole rotten structure crashing down. She stood up, her hands on her hips, and looked at me with a sneer of pure, uncut contempt. Oh, I'm sorry. Is providing for your girlfriend too much for you? Be a man, David. That's your job, not mine. The world just went quiet. All the noise, all the excuses, all the endless circular arguments of the past year just stopped. She had finally said the quiet part out loud. She saw me not as a partner, but as a function. A walking, talking ATM whose sole purpose was to fund her lifestyle while she lectured me on my patriarchal obligations. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just looked at her, at this complete stranger standing in my living room, and a profound sense of calm settled over me. I just nodded. You're right, I said, my voice eerily quiet. My mistake. I turned, walked into the bedroom, and closed the door, leaving her standing there, smug and triumphant. She thought she had won. She thought she had put me back in my place. She had no idea I was about to teach her a very long, very detailed, and very expensive lesson on the true meaning of the word job. Update 1. The next day, I took the day off work. I told Valerie I was going to a job site on the other side of the state and wouldn't be back until late. She barely registered it, already absorbed in her online world. "Okay, have fun," she'd mumbled. My first stop was not a job site. It was a hardware store. I bought a heavy-duty keyed padlock and hasp for the refrigerator. I bought new, keyed locking doorknobs for every single cabinet and pantry door in the kitchen. I spent about $200. It was the best money I've ever spent. My second stop was the grocery store. I went on the kind of shopping spree you see in the movies. I bought thick-cut ribeye steaks, fresh salmon, organic vegetables, expensive cheeses, craft beer, a bottle of the 25-year-old single malt scotch I'd been saving for a special occasion. I filled 2 carts to overflowing. I spent over $1,000 on the best food money could buy. Back at the apartment, I got to work. It took me less than an hour to install the new hardware. The fridge now had a thick steel hasp drilled into the side, with a heavy padlock securing the doors. Every single cabinet, from the ones holding the plates and glasses to the pantry with the dry goods, now had a shiny new lock. The only person with the keys was me. Then, I put away the groceries. I stocked the fridge and the cabinets until they were bursting. The kitchen looked like a gourmet market, a paradise of beautiful, delicious, and completely inaccessible food. When I was done, I sat down at the kitchen table and drafted a document. It was a budget, a detailed line-item accounting of every single expense in our shared life. The rent, the utilities, the car payments, the insurance, the groceries, the subscriptions to her various streaming services. At the bottom, I put the grand total, the monthly cost of the lifestyle she took for granted. Next to it, I put the total of her monthly contribution, 0. I left the budget on the kitchen table, took my new set of keys, and left. I spent the rest of the day at my workshop, actually getting some work done, feeling lighter and more clear-headed than I had in years. I got home around 8 o'clock that night. The scene in the apartment was exactly what I had expected. Valerie was standing in the middle of the kitchen, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She was surrounded by her 2 best friends, a pair of equally entitled and useless women named Qley and Jessica, who were looking at the locked cabinets with expressions of horrified disbelief. "What is this?" Valerie shrieked the moment I walked in. "What did you do to my kitchen?" "My kitchen," I corrected her, calmly setting my work bag down. "And I just secured my assets." "You put a padlock on the refrigerator," she screamed, her voice hitting a pitch I didn't know was humanly possible. "This is insane. This is abusive." I walked over to the kitchen table and picked up the budget I had left for her. "This," I said, holding it up, "is a budget. It's a breakdown of what it costs to run this household. And this," I said, gesturing to the locked cabinets, "is what the person who pays for all of it gets to eat." I pulled my new keys out of my pocket, unlocked the pantry, and took out a box of pasta and a jar of high-end marinara sauce. I unlocked the fridge and took out a package of ground sirloin. "But what am I supposed to eat?" she asked, her voice a mixture of rage and genuine, terrified confusion. I looked at her, then at her 2 friends, who were staring at me like I had just grown a second head. I gave them a polite, empty smile. "Yesterday, you gave me a very clear and concise job description," I said to Valerie. "You told me it was my job to be a man and provide. You're right. My job is to provide. So I have provided this food for myself. Your job as a strong, independent, modern woman who is not a 1950s housewife is to provide for yourself. So I suggest you get to work." I turned my back on them and started cooking my dinner, the sound of their sputtering, incoherent rage the most satisfying seasoning I could have asked for. Update 2. The domestic war that followed was a sight to behold. Valerie and her friends, after about an hour of impotent screaming and a failed attempt to pick the padlock on the fridge with a bobby pin, finally retreated to the living room to plot their next move. Their brilliant strategy, it turned out, was to launch a full-scale social media smear campaign. Valerie posted a long, tear-filled Instagram story, complete with a dramatic, black-and-white photo of the padlocked refrigerator. She wrote about her financially abusive and controlling boyfriend who was literally trying to starve her. Qley and Jessica immediately shared it, adding their own commentary about my toxic masculinity and my fragile male ego. They thought they could shame me into submission. They thought their army of online followers would rise up and condemn me. They had fundamentally misunderstood the man they were dealing with. I didn't have 1,000 followers. I had a few hundred, mostly other guys in the trades, clients, and family, and they were not the type to be swayed by a tearful Instagram post. While they were fighting their war in the digital world, I was fighting mine in the real one. The next morning, while Valerie was still asleep, I made my next move. I took her car keys. Her car, a trendy little SUV, was leased, and like everything else in her life, it was in my name. I was the primary lessee. She was just the authorized driver. I drove her car to a secure storage facility I owned on the other side of town and parked it in an empty unit. Then I called the leasing company. I explained that I was the primary account holder and that the authorized driver, my now ex-girlfriend, was no longer authorized. I told them the vehicle was secured and asked them where they would like me to have it delivered. Back at the apartment, I continued the process of systematically dismantling the infrastructure of her comfortable life. I canceled her supplementary credit card. I changed the passwords on our shared Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon accounts. I even called the high-end gym she belonged to, the one I paid for, and canceled her membership. She woke up around noon to find her car gone and a brief, polite note on the kitchen table. As we are no longer in a relationship, I have taken the liberty of returning the vehicle that is leased in my name. As your friend, I would advise you to arrange for alternative transportation. Best, David. The meltdown that followed was of biblical proportions. The screaming, the crying, the accusations, it was a repeat of the previous night, but amplified by a factor of 10. Her friends came over again, not to help, but to act as a Greek chorus of indignation, fueling her sense of victimhood. I came home from work that evening to find the three of them sitting in the living room, surrounded by takeout containers from an expensive sushi restaurant. They had apparently decided to have a solidarity dinner. They all glared at me as I walked in. I didn't say a word. I just went to my locked kitchen, pulled out a 2-inch thick ribeye steak, a few potatoes, and some asparagus. I fired up the grill on the balcony and cooked myself a meal that smelled like victory. I ate it at the dining room table, in silence, while the three of them watched me with a mixture of hatred and, I was pleased to see, a dawning sense of hunger. The final phase of my in-house operation was the eviction. I had my lawyer draft a formal, legally airtight notice giving her 30 days to vacate my apartment. I didn't just mail it. I hired a process server. He showed up the next day, while Qley and Jessica were there, and served her the papers in front of her friends. The humiliation was a small, satisfying bonus. The 30 days that followed were a slow, painful education for Valerie in the concept of reality. She had no car, no money, and now no home. Her friends, who were so quick to offer their outrage on her behalf, were suddenly very busy when she asked if she could crash on their couches. Qley was allergic to her cat. Jessica's apartment was just too small. Her parents, who she had a strained relationship with, were her last resort. They agreed to let her move back into her childhood bedroom, but they were not happy about it. And they made it clear that her free ride was over. She would have to get a real full-time job and start paying them rent. Final update. It's been a year. I'm sitting in the living room of my apartment, a space that is now quiet, clean, and entirely my own. The only art on the walls is the art I've chosen. The only food in the fridge is the food I've bought. It is a place of peace. The divorce from Valerie, well, the eviction since we were never married, was anticlimactic. She moved her things out at the end of the 30 days, leaving the apartment a mess. She tried to fight me for some of the furniture, but since I had receipts for every single item, her claim went nowhere. Her life, from what I've heard through the grapevine, has been a series of harsh lessons. She is still living with her parents. She had to sell most of her designer clothes and handbags to pay for the security deposit on her own, much cheaper apartment, which she is now sharing with 2 other roommates. She is working as a barista at a coffee shop, a job she despises. Her grand artistic dreams have been put on hold indefinitely by the mundane reality of having to pay her own bills. Her social media presence has withered. The glamorous, carefree influencer has been replaced by a bitter, resentful woman who posts vague, passive-aggressive quotes about betrayal and toxic men. Her audience, deprived of the aspirational content they had followed her for, has moved on. I saw her once, a few months ago. I was at a restaurant with some clients. She was our waitress. The moment she saw me, her face went pale. She said something to her manager and disappeared into the back, and we were assigned a new server. My clients didn't notice a thing. My revenge was not about a single explosive moment. It was a slow, methodical, and brutally practical process. I didn't scream or yell. I just took her at her word. She wanted to be a modern, independent woman. I simply removed all the obstacles, namely my entire financial and emotional support system that were preventing her from achieving that goal. She wanted me to be a man. I was. I provided for myself. I protected my assets, and I secured my home. I just stopped defining her as a part of that home. And that, it turns out, is a lesson in responsibility that no amount of feminist theory can teach you. When I surprised my fiancée with a new apartment, she whispered to her bridesmaid, "Perfect, easier for my ex to visit." They both laughed. I heard every word. 2 days later, she was locked out of the lease she never signed. The look on her face was perfect. Pure, unadulterated joy. It was the look I had been working towards for 6 months, the culmination of late nights at work and extra weekend shifts. I had just unlocked the door to a brand new top-floor apartment with a view that stretched across the entire city and handed the keys to my fiancée, Amber. "Surprise," I said, and for a second, seeing her eyes light up, I actually felt like it was all worth it. "Oh my God, Mark," she breathed, walking through the door. "You did this? For us?" Her maid of honor and best friend, Jenna, followed her in, her own jaw practically on the floor. They ran from room to room, squealing about the walk-in closet, the massive kitchen island, the balcony that was bigger than Amber's entire current living room. This was the plan, the grand gesture, the place we were supposed to start our married life together in 3 months. I had signed the lease, paid the security deposit, and the first month's rent. All from my own savings, all in my name only. It was a surprise, after all. "I'm just going to grab the champagne from the car," I said, feeling like the king of the world. I left them to explore and headed back down to the garage. It took me a minute to find the cooler in the trunk. When I got back to the apartment, the door was slightly ajar. I could hear them talking inside, their voices low and excited. I was about to push the door open and make my grand entrance with the champagne when I heard my name. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. It was Jenna's voice, a conspiratorial whisper. "I can't believe he actually pulled this off. It's huge. So what are you going to do about Kyle?" Kyle, her ex-boyfriend, the one she swore was just a friend, the one she still texted constantly, the one I had a permanent knot in my stomach about. Amber's reply came, followed by a light, tinkling laugh that sounded completely different from the one she had used with me moments earlier. "What do you mean? This is perfect. My place was so small, it was always a hassle for him to visit when Mark was out of town. This is so much easier." Jenna snickered. "Oh, you are terrible. He'll never know," Amber said dismissively. "He's so wrapped up in work and wedding planning, he wouldn't notice if Kyle was sleeping on our couch." The champagne bottle in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The entire world tilted on its axis. Every doubt I had ever pushed down, every red flag I had ever ignored, all of it came crashing down on me in that one gut-wrenching moment. She didn't see a home. She saw a more convenient place to cheat on me. My grand gesture wasn't a foundation for our future. It was an upgrade for her affair. I backed away from the door silently. I stood in the hallway for what felt like an hour, my heart pounding in my ears. The sound of their laughter echoed from inside the apartment. My apartment. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and plastered a smile on my face. Then I walked in. "Who's ready for a toast?" I said, holding up the bottle. Update 1. The next 48 hours were a performance. I was the happiest, most devoted fiancé in the world. We celebrated all weekend. I listened to Amber talk endlessly about furniture and paint colors. I watched as she took dozens of pictures, posting them on social media with captions like, the home of our dreams. I'm the luckiest girl in the world, future Mrs. Miller. She was so high on her victory, so confident in my cluelessness, that she didn't notice the change in my eyes. She didn't notice that I had stopped touching her, that my smiles didn't quite reach my ears, that I was observing her like a scientist studying a particularly venomous snake. While she was busy planning her new life, I was busy dismantling it. My first call on Monday morning was to the building manager. I explained the situation briefly and professionally. The engagement has been called off due to unforeseen circumstances, I said. The lease is solely in my name, and my fiancé will not be moving in. I need to have the locks on Unit 1201 changed immediately. I will be the only person with a key. The manager was understanding. He had seen it all before. He said he could have a locksmith there by 5 o'clock that evening. Perfect. My second call was to the moving company I had hired to move our things from our separate apartments the following weekend. I canceled the service, forfeiting the deposit. It was a small price to pay. My third call was to my lawyer. I told him everything, including what I had overheard. He advised me on the next steps, confirming that since Amber was not on the lease and had never established residency, I was within my rights to deny her access. He also suggested I start separating our finances immediately. That afternoon, while Amber was at work, I did just that. I closed the joint bank account we used for wedding planning, an account I had funded almost entirely. I canceled the supplementary credit card she used for everything from gas to groceries. I went to the jeweler who was holding our wedding bands and canceled the order. Amber had already started moving some of her personal belongings into the new apartment over the weekend. A few boxes of clothes, some expensive designer bags, her laptop. She wanted to get a head start, she said. So, on my way to the apartment to meet the locksmith, I stopped and rented a 5x5 storage unit at a facility a few blocks away. I paid for 1 month in her name. At the apartment, I took every single item of hers and carefully moved it to the new storage unit. I took pictures of everything as it went in, documenting that nothing was damaged. I left the unit unlocked, with a new padlock sitting inside on top of her boxes. Then, the locksmith arrived and changed the locks. I took the old keys, the ones I had so proudly given her 2 days before, and I dropped them into a nearby sewer grate. I went home to my old apartment, the one I was supposed to be moving out of, and I waited. The call came around 8 that night. It was Amber, and she was furious. "My key isn't working," she yelled. "I went to drop off another box, and I can't get in. Did you forget to give me the right one?" "No, Amber, that key is obsolete." "What does that mean? What's going on?" "The doorman said a locksmith was here earlier." "That's right," I said. "I had the locks changed. You don't live there." There was a moment of pure, baffled silence. "What are you talking about?" "Of course I live there. We're moving in this weekend." "No," I said, my voice cold and even. "We are not. I overheard you, Amber. I was at the door. I heard you and Jenna talking. I heard all about Kyle and how this new apartment would be so much easier for him to visit." The silence this time was different. It was the silence of a cornered animal. You heard that?" she stammered. "Every word, every laugh. So here's the new plan. You are not my fiancé anymore. You are not moving into my apartment. And we are done. Your belongings, the ones you moved in, are in a storage unit. I'm texting you the address and the unit number right now. The rest of your things are still at your old place. I suggest you call your landlord and see if it's too late to reverse your notice." "You can't do this," she shrieked, the panic finally setting in. "My name is on the lease." "No, it's not," I said. "Go ahead and check. The lease is in my name. The deposit was my money. The rent was paid from my account. You have absolutely no legal right to that apartment. You were a guest who was invited, and now you are uninvited. Goodbye, Amber." I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Then I blocked Jenna. The war, I knew, was just beginning. Update 2. The fallout was even more chaotic than I had anticipated. Amber and Jenna, deprived of direct access to me, went on the offensive. They launched a full-scale smear campaign across every social media platform and to every mutual friend we had. The story they spun was a work of fiction. According to them, I was a manipulative monster who had lured Amber into a false sense of security with a new apartment, only to cruelly rip it away and throw her out on the street for no reason. all because of an innocent, out-of-context joke they had shared. They conveniently left out the part about Kyle. My phone started blowing up with texts from people I barely knew, calling me a villain. Amber's mother called me, screaming about how I had destroyed her daughter's life and that they were going to sue me for everything I had. Her father sent a long, threatening email, promising to ruin me professionally. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I executed the second phase of my plan. I had one crucial piece of evidence they didn't know about. The apartment building had a high-tech security system, including audio recording in the common areas for resident safety. The hallway outside my apartment door was a common area. I had my lawyer send a formal request to the building management for the audio recording from that specific time and date. They complied. The recording was crystal clear. You could hear Jenna asking about Kyle. You could hear Amber's giddy, treacherous reply. You could hear their laughter. I drafted a single, simple email. The recipients were every single person who had been invited to our wedding, including Amber's entire family. The subject line was, "An important correction regarding my breakup with Amber." The body of the email was short. It said, "There's been a lot of misinformation circulating about the end of my engagement to Amber. I believe in transparency, so I am providing the facts." Below is a link to a short audio file, which was recorded in a common area of my new apartment building. It contains the conversation that led to my decision. I believe it will answer any questions you may have. I attached the audio file and hit send. The effect was instantaneous. It was like dropping a bomb in the middle of their pity party. The angry texts and calls stopped. They were replaced by a wave of apologies from friends who had believed her story. People were horrified. The raw, undeniable proof of her betrayal was irrefutable. Amber and Jenna deleted their social media accounts within hours. Her parents stopped calling. Their threats were empty, and they knew it. They had no legal leg to stand on, and now they had no social standing either. They had been exposed as liars and cheats. A few days later, I got a call from Amber's landlord. She had in fact given notice on her old apartment, and it had already been rented to someone else. She was, for all intents and purposes, homeless. She had apparently been staying on Jenna's couch, but that situation was imploding quickly, as Jenna was now being ostracized by her own friends for her role in the deception. Amber's parents had to rent a U-Haul and move her things out of the storage unit and back into her childhood bedroom. The girl who was supposed to be starting a new life in a luxury apartment was now, at 30 years old, back to living under her parents' roof, surrounded by posters of boy bands from her teenage years. Final update: it's been 6 months. I live in the new apartment alone, and I've never been happier. The space, which was once tainted by her betrayal, now feels like a sanctuary. It's a testament to my ability to build a life for myself, by myself. The wedding, of course, never happened. I was able to get some of the deposits back, but I lost a significant amount of money. I don't even care. I consider it the price of my freedom, a cheap price to pay to have avoided a lifetime of deceit. Amber's life, from what I've heard, is a mess. She and Jenna are no longer friends. The pressure of the scandal, combined with the stress of Amber living on her couch, caused a massive fight that ended their friendship for good. Jenna apparently blamed Amber for dragging her into her mess and ruining her reputation. Kyle, the mysterious ex, vanished the second the drama started. He was never a serious contender for her affection. He was a thrill, an ego boost, a secret she kept for fun. He wanted a side piece, not a broke, homeless, and publicly shamed girlfriend. He ghosted her completely. Amber is still living with her parents. She had to get a job as a waitress to pay for her car and her credit card debt. I heard through the grapevine that she is bitter and angry, constantly complaining to anyone who will listen about how I ruined her life. She has taken zero accountability for her own actions. In her mind, she is still the victim. A couple of months ago, I was at a hardware store on a Saturday morning, picking up some things for the apartment. I turned a corner and almost ran right into her. She was with her mother and she looked diminished. The confident, radiant woman I had once known was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and angry. She saw me, and for a second, her eyes widened in a flash of panic. Then, it hardened into a glare. Her mother started to say something, but Amber just grabbed her arm and pulled her away, practically running to the other side of the store. That was it. No screaming, no confrontation. Just a silent, pathetic retreat. My revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, efficient, and absolute. I didn't have to ruin her reputation. I just provided the platform for her to ruin it herself. I didn't have to make her homeless. I just refused to provide her with a home to cheat on me in. I simply took away the safety net she thought would always be there, and I let her fall. She didn't just lose a fiancé and an apartment. She lost the comfortable, easy life she had taken for granted, and she has no one to blame but herself. That, to me, is the most satisfying outcome of all.